Hiya. This is, well, you know who I am? Maybe you don't know who I am. I'm Joey Reynolds. They should put a name tag under me like they're doing all those big stories when someone's committed a crime. And believe me, every night we do this, or every day, depending on when you look at this, because it's assigned viewing, and that's the way it is with television today and radio and everything that's going on the internet comes from the phone anyway. So if the enemy wants to destroy us, they ought to attack AT&T and cut the wire, and then we're done. I wanted to tell you, I'm pretty much of a realist about how I am not particularly the most important person on the air. Matter of fact, when I was first starting in Buffalo years ago, I didn't want to be much, and it's working out fine. So, I wanted to introduce my guest, but before I do that, there are heroes in life. And in my family, I always thought my father, he was Superman, until I got older and I realized that he was just a grumpy old man with a cape. That was the way it went. And my uncle, who was Spider-Man, well, that's because he could rob second floors. He was a second floor man, they call it, in the mob business, which we don't want to talk too much about that because I'm too close to Little Italy. Not right now. Right now I'm in Florida, which is close to godliness. And I want to introduce my guest, James Gavin. He's a really terrific writer, and he's a journalist and a historian, and he's also a pain in the ass. But let's talk about some of the things that are positive. Hi, James. How are you?
Joey, I am excellent here on the Upper West Side. Well, welcome to the inner sanctum.
I know. I see that. What are all those books? Are you in the print is dead? No, didn't you get the memo?
Well, Joey, I cannot think of music or books as some ephemeral thing that rained down on us from a cloud. I love the object of an album. I love holding a book. I love, you can't see it, but this is my wall of sound behind my computer. So I have upper left, upper right, lower left, lower right, and it comes at me like I'm in church. So I'm an old-fashioned guy in that sense.
Well, me too. I got a jukebox.
You do?
So, yeah. Now, what do you have? Who's your favorite artist right now?
Let me think. I'll tell you who my favorite artist is.
Don't tell me Billy Eckstein or someone that died about 30 years ago.
No, both of these women are active and writing, in my opinion, some of, if not the best songs being written today. They're both singer-songwriters, Brandy Clark and Gretchen Peters.
Good.
Both of whom are, in my opinion, fantastic singer-songwriters, named not very long ago by Bernie Taupin as two of his favorite songwriters of today.
And, Bernie Taupin, of course, you should tell everybody, is the writer for with Elton John.
He was Elton John's longtime
just frame of reference. Also, I want to mention that where I was most recently, I mentioned Little Italy, and I think I told you that I was with a hooker on 46th Street, right? Did I tell you that?
No, I thought
I got a picture of that here, which I'd like to share with you. There's my hooker. Do you know who that is? Besides,
looks like Sidney Myer.
That's right. That's who it is. Exactly.
Are you kidding?
No, I'm serious about it. Look at him. I mean, come on, take a good look. That's Sidney Myer playing Captain.
We have to explain who Sidney is, of course.
Yeah. So I want to bring him up because that's how I met you. Years ago. Sidney has a club called Don't Tell Mama, and it's so well named because during this generation when we are not supposed to reveal where we were drinking or where we were doing drugs or any of that stuff, that was the generation before this, and the speakeasies before that. Now you cover all of that, and I don't think a lot of people don't know you. They may know your writing, they may know your work, they may know a lot of things about you, but I want to have you on here because this series of shows that we're doing is a celebration of people who deserve the spotlight. And I call this collection Quality People. I use the word quality rather than famous or fame or fortune or stars, and celebrities. That's so crippling. All of that is crippling. So, besides my being a mental paraplegic, I want to mention to the audience that James Gavin is one of the best journalists, and would we say longest or the keeper of the flame of all of these generations of greatness. And we got to start somewhere. I mean, the last time I saw you was with Judy Collins when I was down at one of the award shows a couple of years ago, I think.
Yeah, that was probably the Bistro Awards.
Yeah, the Bistro Awards, right? And I hadn't seen you since then.
Yeah,
and I tried to. I was nuzzling up to her so I didn't have to pick up the check.
Did it
but
work?
You know what I want to know from you is what is your best, in your own estimation? And you have a lot of fans, but what's your best shot? What was your best shot?
You mean the best thing I've produced to date?
Yeah.
I'm proudest of my Chet Baker biography, Joey, because that has really traveled the world. There are, again, not visible within this frame, but over there are about 15 foreign editions of that book, the most recent of which came out about a year ago, I guess. That book keeps getting rediscovered. It's now 18 years old. That book, which is a terrifying tale for a lot of people, it'll be the experience that I someday remember when I'm in my final moments. It brought me to Europe for the first time in 1996 and 97. I made two Chet Baker research tours of Europe, traveling by sleeper train and sleeping on people's sofas, floors, in one case in someone's bathtub. I was hot on the trail of Chet Baker, and who had died. Chet died in 1988, and I began my book at the end of 1994. And I look back at that experience as thrilling and harrowing, because I've never, in fact, even experimented with drugs. And as one of my interviewees said, the cleanest cat in New York is doing a book about Chet. So I interviewed 300 people for that book, and I was plunged into Chet's world, which was, from an early age until he died, heavily revolving around two pivot points. One of them was music and one of them was drugs. Fantastic experience. At the end of it, I was so exhausted that I literally almost had a nervous breakdown.
Well, he's like the James Dean of jazz, of music.
He was seen that way in the 50s. That's
there were people like that. Steve McQueen, they had that sense of independence, and they were going to do what they're going to do anyway, no matter whether you liked it or not. But you liked it.
I think that's one of the reasons why people are so attracted to Chet Baker, and that is because most people, in my view, live safe lives and do more or less what is expected of them. They marry and they have their families. They stay in one or two or three places throughout their lives. They pay their taxes. They go to work. They retire. Chet Baker did almost none of that. Chet Baker broke more of the normal, predictable laws of real life than almost anybody I know, and he had that incredibly sexy, glamorous danger about him that is so alluring to most people, but most people wouldn't dare to do a fraction of the things that Chet Baker did.
No, especially since he played the accordion.
Yeah, Myron Cohen and Chet.
Myron Cohen. Lars lusted after him. No, Chet was definitely he was a weed guy. He smoked a lot of pot.
Oh yeah, all the time.
Now I got friendly with not to bring me into your book, but I got friendly with Blossom Dearie.
Oh, let's talk about her, please.
Yeah, because there's another one. She's most famous in my generation for I can imitate her.
Would you
self-styling, adorn. That was her commercial. Remember, that's all. She sang that little thing.
Yes.
One of the greatest influences in my life. Did you ever know that? I don't know if you knew that or not.
I didn't know that, but I want to hear all about it.
They call them influencers now because they got to give it a title. And the influencer was Blossom because she always liked my spirit and never said anything to me to describe it. Now, that's an interesting personality trait, is when someone knows who you are, but they don't tell you that they know who you are because it's beyond description. It's just who you are. And it sounds very cosmic. I had another one of those moments in Europe because she did my show a lot in Buffalo, my television show. She played at the Royal Arms. And as a matter of fact, a lot of people play there because Buffalo has some really good hot musicians, in the genre, like Sammy Noto. I don't know if you're familiar with him, or
Yes.
we had a lot of really good jazz in Buffalo. Most of those dinge cities, the industrial cities, produced good jazz players, and Buffalo had a little bit more of a cachet because we had a hot station. My station was #1 all over the country. We served 17 states from that signal that we had in Buffalo on WKBW, which we talked about often on my show. But anyway, the point I'm making is that Blossom used to do my TV show. And then I would go out with her, and I was not really necessarily into weed. I didn't care about that then. I was too young. And I wanted to stay on top of my game, and I was sober. But she was always lighting up, and then being very mellow. And I would say that her songs that were written for her, some of them were I'm hip, I'm aware. Bobby Darin knows my friend, I'm so hip was the lyric at the time. Now it would have to be another person, You'd have to say someone like, Michael Bublé. It's the way she sang those clever songs, and the other ones, Once Upon a Summertime, you may recall. The things that were done by the famous French conductors and writers, and there's so many of those who we don't know who. You see, America doesn't really have a great regard for the name value of the history of things, it seems, until you really get into it, and then you say, oh yeah, or like that's what you write about. So now, Chet Baker, we've discussed, I did, Blossom Dearie. Now, how did you know her?
I got to know Blossom. I met her when I was a teenager in 1983, which is when she played her first weekend at the Ballroom on West 28th Street.
In New York.
Rex, yeah, in New York, indeed. Rex Reed was there that night, too, and Rex is someone that I had grown up reading in the New York Daily News, and I was absolutely thrilled to meet both of these important people in my life. Blossom, I would say from what you just described that you probably got more out of Blossom than most people did, because she didn't say much in general. And what I quickly realized as I got to know her, and I put "know" in air quotes because she was largely unknowable in my opinion, is that the Blossom Dearie character was a complete creation of the stage. Off stage, the irony disappeared, the humor disappeared, and Blossom was a very opaque and dark person. And I know she liked me. There are things on the wall behind me that say, your friend Blossom. And I don't think she said that to too many people, but I don't feel that I knew her very well.
Well, she lived in the Village,
Yes, she lived 15.
And that was very hip back then. Don't forget, they had Edward Albee, who was a writer. He wrote Who Was Afraid of Virginia Woolf. There was a place called the Kettle of Fish. That was a watering hole. Was very important in those days for all of these artists, because the people from Paris and the generation before recreated that in New York. And I think now we're ready to go back to Paris. I think we need another dose of art. We've had an art attack is what we've had.
Well, Blossom lived in that apartment with her first husband, the mystery husband, Bobby Jaspar, who was a Belgian saxophonist and flutist, who died in his 30s in 1965, I believe. And he was there sometimes with Blossom in that apartment, and that's where she continued to live until the end of her life.
I forget about Tony. What's his name? Tony Camille or something like that? Shamil. He used to write a lot of stuff for her. I just had a lot of thoughts going through my head. I remember so many good things, and I know the American public or people who are watching this saying, well, it's it's a journey, and they're tapping into something that maybe it doesn't interest you offhand at the beginning. It doesn't interest the viewer or the listener, but there's a lot of reasons why we are where we are, in a good way. We've done a lot of good. We seem to be celebrating the bad. Television thrives off of what fails, and that's why I'm not on it, because I don't fail. I'm not a national host, because I'm not going to sit there and answer phones and argue about all this ridiculous stuff that doesn't mean anything to me. I would like to present you, and I'm doing a lot of talking now. But I like to present you because you have that traveling, and you have that wealth of knowledge, and you're still in the game. You're still doing it. You're not. We mentioned a couple of names from the past, but you're still celebrating people who are active right now. And,
you're raising an interesting point, though, and it's fascinating to me how certain figures from the past can be rediscovered and deemed cool by younger people. For some oddball reason, a song turns up in a movie, and suddenly that artist or some young, like a disco remixer, for example, Shirley Bassey. This happened to Shirley Bassey. It's always been the case with Peggy Lee, who the subject of my most recently published book.
And I'm going to tell you something. I'm stopping you.
Yeah.
I don't mean to interrupt you, except I don't want to let this thought go by. She is the singer of the national anthem right now. Is that all there is?
Yeah.
Is that all there is, my friend? Keep on dancing.
Yeah.
And that song describes where we're at right now.
I agree with
People
you.
are looking around saying, is that all there is? They want to go back to some economy, professionally. A lot of people like the money they had or the money they have and don't want to lose. That's fear. But I think the Peggy Lee song is just so appropriate for now.
I think so too. Jerry Lieber.
And about her now. I had her last recording, and I will tell you about it. It was at a church with an RCA 44 mic, one mic, and no editing. And the gentleman who produced it in the church on the Upper West Side brought it to me when I was on the air at WOR in New York, and it's a treasure. It is a treasure because this is her. And yet, at the place we mentioned earlier, Don't Tell Mama, there's so many people imitating her. Yeah. One does a very good job. There's one guy in particular.
Oh, Chuck Sweeney.
Yeah. Oh, he's great. And he's also very funny. And he's a regular guy. He's a waiter.
Well, Chuck imitates late period Peggy Lee with the white Dynel Cleopatra wig and the spotlight dark glasses. I absolutely love Chuck Sweeney. I saw him and David Mayoko, I always mispronounce his name, who does Liberace, and the two of them have had this act together of Peggy and Liberace. I saw it on Provincetown last summer.
There's another song that Peggy Lee should be nationally anthemed for, and it describes the presidency. It's called, what's it called? The Folks Who Live on the Hill.
Oh, God, that song is a knife in my heart. She sang that song the last time I ever saw her. Her last New York appearance was at Carnegie Hall in 1995. And that will always be one of the most hair-raising concert experiences I've ever had. Sometimes, do you ever get the sense that sometimes with these famous last appearances that the artist kind of senses that this is it, and they pull a performance out of the hat that you didn't imagine they could still deliver? And that evening felt like a seance. She did 65 minutes. At Mel Torme, she was on the bill with Mel Torme, but at Mel's insistence...
Did he show up?
Mel insisted that she open for him, which should never have been the case. And he insisted that it be known that she was his opening act.
Well, yeah, because he wants to be the closer of... But, he was an arrogant putz.
Boy, was he.
But so talented, but a putz. Even you'll hear stories from... I think, what's his name, the stand-up bass.
Lenhart?
Well, yeah, yeah. He will tell you great stories about him. He traveled with Mel Torme.
Well, and he played for Peggy for years as well in the last phase of her career. But Peggy, that night, it was just, I had the feeling that time was just hanging and not moving in the air. And I have never felt such a riveted audience in my life as I felt that night with Peggy Lee. And she sang The Folks Who Live on the Hill, which she'd been singing since the 1950s. And when she got to the line, and when the kids grow up and leave us, I'm getting goosebumps now to remember it, because her voice turned to steel at that moment. And it was not wistful. It was fear shot through the air when she sang that. And all of a sudden it was a song about desertion, aloneness, and that was what she could do. And suddenly you heard something you never heard in a song before.
Also, I was just thinking another one of those Hill songs about the government. Actually, the Beatles more appropriately sang The Fool on the Hill. But let's not go there. The thing that I wanted to bring up was Josephine Baker.
Yes.
And the gentleman who was supposedly her bastard son. She had many of them. Yeah, John. Did he not have a restaurant on? I know he did.
It's still there, posthumously, of course, because John took his own life, as you know.
Yeah, he was great. You know, he told me that how did he say? Oh yeah, I was asking what I should have that was special. I wanted what a celebrity ate, and he gave me what Tom Cruise would order, which was the sauerkraut. I don't want to give the recipe entirely, but it was. I ate like Tom Cruise that night. But he was really the son of Josephine Baker. She had many affairs, right?
I think Jean-Claude was. I'm very confused. He purported to be one of the adopted children of Josephine.
Oh, that's it.
I'm a little vague about it.
Yeah.
But boy, did he understand her, and he was very forthcoming in telling people the unvarnished truth about Josephine Baker. He adored her, but he also knew that she was a monster.
Was she black and white, or was she black? I don't know if she was.
Black. I mean. Yeah. In Josephine Baker's, it was a mixture for sure.
Yeah.
But you know, Jean-Claude, factoid about Jean-Claude, when I was writing or revising my first book, which was about the history of New York cabaret, I learned and interviewed Jean-Claude about a historic night that he was part of. Do you remember when there was a new Blue Angel in New York in the 1970s?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, which had a big French-style lavish review with semi-nudity and a cast of thousands. And that place burned. There was a tragic fire there, and I believe 7 people died in that fire, and Jean-Claude was there that night. And he made it. He was working there, and he made it out. He was full of fabulous stories, that man. And he didn't whitewash anything. And boy, did he know how to tell a story. He was the kind of old-fashioned nightclub and restaurant owner whose presence permeated every inch of that place. And after Jean-Claude died, it was hard to imagine how Chez Josephine could go on without him, because he was Chez Josephine, but it's still there, thank God.
He was very much the character in Le Cage aux Folles.
Yes,
I think that was a model for that particular Broadway show and movie, and written by who did the Le Cage aux Folles? It was
Harvey Fierstein.
Yeah, Harvey Fierstein. Yeah, Fierstein.
Fierstein.
I've got to think about all this. I haven't thought about you in a while, James.
Our heads are so stuffed with names. I'm really surprised when I can pull up any name at all. I have about 4 megabytes of memory space in my brain left.
Well, what is the latest thing that you're working on right now? If we can jump to that for a
Thank
minute.
you for asking. My current project, which I'm in the final stages of writing, is a biography of George Michael. And I've done to date about 150 interviews. I've been in Europe, of course, in England and in France in order to do research on it. And the George Michael story is a sensational story with great music attached. George was a great singer. George had, and I only saw him once at Madison Square Garden, but George had a presence on a stage that to me was almost Frank Sinatra-like, because he had the ability to command an arena of people basically with just himself. Yes, there were projections behind him, which I felt he didn't even need. Yes, there was a band, but yes, there were backup singers, but basically George was the show.
You gotta have faith.
You gotta have faith. Yeah. That song, that single was released in 1988, and that album, Faith, made him the #1 selling pop artist in the world. I mean, I think that year he surpassed even Michael Jackson and Madonna. It was
and on tour, the Glass Spider tour was David Bowie, and they were competing back in the day.
George worshipped David Bowie, but most of all, he worshipped Prince, and he borrowed a lot from Prince. Joey, where were you? Now, the single "I Want Your Sex" was released in 1987, I think June of 1987. Do you remember the release of that very controversial single?
No.
Okay. That's an interesting episode in my book, in fact, because George released a song that was calculated for controversy called "I Want Your Sex." And I don't think that this was in any way his intention. He knew that it would be controversial because it was so explicitly pro-sex. But what he hadn't bargained for is the fact that that song landed at possibly the peak moment of AIDS horror. And he was excoriated by a lot of people for having been supposedly insensitive to that cause. It was a #2 hit, however. And that's the song that he opened and closed the gigantic and gigantically successful Faith tour with in 1988. So it's a great story.
You know, there are several of those artists who came as a result of radio, because radio had the airplay, and the airplay came from records, and records, of course, were married to radio. We talked about this one other time the other night. We had somebody on it. Johnny Madera and I were talking about that, and how the marriage took place, and then there was a divorce. I mean, I'm just repeating that now, but radio and records were together, and that's what created the superstars. You know, it's very difficult to do that right now.
It's hard for me to wrap my head around what radio even is today. And what is pop radio today? I don't tune
in. It's gone. That's what it is.
Yeah.
It's not there. You know, and I continue to fight for it. And there are certain trade papers, they act like everything's okay. You know, when you're status quo, you're comfortable with what it is, and you don't want any change. It's very boring, because life is a change after change after change, and you know that's why I'm wearing my Depends. But you know, I mean, you really got to go for the idea that this is good and it's not forever. This is bad and it's also not forever. I mean, you know, it's a philosophy, and so many of us in our country who are very privileged, because we've had a taste of travel and a taste of the fine things in life. And I don't mean, how do you like your steak, Mr. Reynolds? You know, I mean, I'm talking about how we have met interesting people and they've influenced us, the influencer again, or they have been appreciated, or they appreciated us. You know, now let's go to that. I mean, I know a lot of people who have a great love for you because you're a very good journalist, and you have kept the integrity.
Well, I started writing my first book when I was a junior at Fordham University. And that was a book in which I recreated the old days of New York cabaret. going up through the 70s, actually, 70s and 80s. And I was 20 years old when I started working on that book, and I must have seemed so strange to these 1940s and 50s cabaret stars because
and the Jesuits.
Don't get me started on
They love to drink, but go ahead. You know, they're the lawyers of the Catholic Church. You know that, right?
No, I never did. I know a thing or two about the Catholic Church, though. You're looking at a altar boy for 7 years, and then I did readings at St. Mary's Church in the Getty Square in Yonkers. So Catholicism, man, that's a whole other subject.
So they held you back. You were supposed to graduate from altar boy after about 4 years, not 7.
7 years. But the thing was that sometimes as an altar boy, we would get to serve funerals, which were done during the day. And that would get me out of school for an hour or 2 hours. And then sometimes I would get a tip of $3, $4, $5. And that's how I would save the money to go to Sam Goody's at Cross County Shopping Center and buy albums. So I had a plan. But in any case, my books, writing these books has, and Lena Horne is the one that we have mentioned yet. These books I've gone pretty much from one to another, and I've done lots of articles and lectures and things in between. And I often look back at my life thus far, and I think, how have I ever survived to this point? It's not an easy road, but it's the road that I chose.
Well, I got the name for your next book.
Yes.
Two drink minimum.
That's another thing, because I don't drink.
You don't drink, you don't smoke.
I would sit at Jan Wallman's on Cornelia Street in the Village, was the first cabaret that I frequented back in the 80s. And I would sit at the bar and I would order 1 or 2 orange juices, and that's what I had for the night. I had no money. So luckily I didn't have to worry about ordering expensive mixed drinks. But that world of cabaret has been described by so many people as endangered and fragile and this and that, when in fact it is the most indomitable field of show business I think there is, because people are always holding it down for the count, and always new clubs are opening, and always there are people who have a song in their heart or jokes to tell and need a place to do it, and these places are going to exist no matter what.
How are we going to do it with separation?
Well, oh boy. Well, I think that what they are already starting to do in certain places outside the U.S. Is spacing people so that you may have a large space but only a handful of people in it. And it seems pathetic on the one hand, and on the other, it's a step in the right direction to regaining our lives. Our friend Sidney Myer at Don't Tell Mama, I'm sure, is bouncing off the walls of his East Side apartment, just itching to get back to that nightlife. And I think...
Well, he can save face now. When there's 6 people in there, he can say, well, we have a full house.
I hope he watches this.
He'll watch it. I love Sidney. You know, he used to be on my show every week. You know that, right?
Yes, and the Joey Reynolds show, I've done a fair amount of radio, and I've never had more fun than I had on those big group nights on your show, when this weird assortment of people were all thrown together with you as our magnet, and we would sit there for hours shooting the breeze in a completely freewheeling, anything goes kind of manner, and I had so much fun on those shows.
I wish someone would pick up on that with a younger person, or younger people at least, and do this on radio again. This would work. It's called a farm team, or on television, where we can get rid of those jabronis that just they're highly mediocre, which is very nice if you want a paycheck. But how about, I want to be highly entertained, not not highly bored. But you know, I don't want to sound like I'm a critic. You're supposed to be a critic. And
Well, I don't write many reviews. I never have. So I couldn't honestly call myself that. I do a book review for the New York Times Book Review every now and again.
yeah,
But what I love to do is get inside personalities, and especially people who are involved with music, because then you can figure out for yourself how the private life impacted upon the music and vice versa. Musicians' stories are so much fun to tell, as you well know, because you've known millions of them in your life. And sometimes there is no seeming connection between the art and the actual human being. Blossom is kind of an example of that, Blossom Dearie, because I had dinner with Blossom twice that I can remember, where we just sat down and talked. And conversation with Blossom was very strange, because you never knew what you were going to say. I'm speaking personally now, but I never knew what I was going to say that was going to cause the Iron Curtain to drop. She was completely in her own world. And then I think she lived for making music and presenting it on the stage. And again, the Blossom Dearie character that she created was just like this enchanted, strange pixie that made magic that never changed from year to year. She was in residency, as you know, at Danny's Skylight Room on 46th Street for about a decade.
And they never had a skylight.
Wasn't there in the Danny's Skylight?
No.
I guess it was hallucinating. Okay. Point. Anyway, if you went to see Blossom in those years, she gave you the same experience that you got from her Verve recordings of the 1950s. It was quite magical. And
you also, before we leave here, I want to make sure we get some of this in here. Don't forget Lena Horne now. She was a movie star extraordinaire and had such a great way about her. And then there was someone who was very much like her that was discovered by Mitch Miller, brought over from Australia. Do you remember who that was?
Mitch Miller.
The one he brought from Australia was Diana Trask. I don't know if you remember her, but there was
Sure I do. Yes, Columbia recording artist.
Yeah, these were genres. They were certain kind. They're one of a kind. Yeah. So I don't know how you could have a genre means that you have more than one of that. It's a style.
Mitch Miller historically has gotten bashed a lot for having created so much purported trash that filled the 1950s era with, fluff, lightweight stuff. But there was so much great music in the Mitch Miller era, and he gave us so many. He gave us Rosemary Clooney. He gave us
Four Lads.
Yeah, the Four Lads were wonderful.
Tony Bennett.
He gave us
Johnny Mathis. Andy Williams. Just a few.
Yes.
And the Mitch Miller choir and chorus, and Ray Conniff.
well, that's him too. The Ray Conniff was great for what he did, and the record sales that these people are racked up are what paid for the other stuff. So
and Columbia created the record club, where you would join and you would get an album of your choice every month, and you signed up for a year or two, I think. And don't forget, and I know you haven't, the Battle Hymn of the Republic by the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. I mean, that was another Mitch Miller thing. And Percy Faith, the theme from A Summer Place. Just pulling them out of my hat here.
It's interesting. These things you're mentioning, though, here we are now. It's 60 years after or more after a lot of that music was created, and here we are in 2020 talking about it today. That's got to come for something.
Well, that's true. We are talking about it, and most people who are in their 20s right now looking at this saying, what the hell are they talking about?
We're talking, it was another world of pop music back then, wasn't it, though? In a couple of nights, I'm going to be watching by Zoom the Herb Alpert, as you know, has created an award for vanguard artists, renegade artists who are creating very unusual art. I think last year was the 25th anniversary year. I don't think, I know it was. And he has to do the ceremony, which is normally an extremely lavish, highly elegant, beautifully thought out ceremony celebrating the 5 recipients of this annual grant that he gives. But I remember hearing Herb say a couple of years ago that the record industry that he and Jerry Moss made such an impact on with A&M Records in the 1960s just doesn't exist anymore.
No, they bought the old Charlie Chaplin studios.
Oh, I didn't know that.
That was A&M on La Brea. And Les Paul lived across the street. That's a very good neighborhood, And I did the first satellite show in the country.
It
was
really?
1977, and it was on La Brea, yeah. I did the broadcast.
I have no way of knowing what pop music of today will still be talked about decades hence, but Herb and Jerry created music that has lasted now for 50 years. And
they probably have Brazil 2020.
Brazil 66.
Yeah, and then there was Sergio Mendes and the Carpenters and Traffic, Stevie Winwood. It was a good mix there. A lot of hits.
And let us not forget Mrs. Herb Alpert, Lonnie Hall, one of my favorite singers, singing gorgeously to this day with her.
And right across the street from Herb Alpert, under his nose, and he never signed her, was Roberta Flack singing at the Etc. Club, and she was singing her great song with that little delicate piano, and then they put Donny Hathaway with her.
Yes.
Isn't that it? The first time I saw your face, isn't that it?
Well, the first time ever I saw your face.
Yeah. And it was right across the street from him, and you missed it. He could have signed it. Now, wait, right on the corner of that is the first drive-in restaurant where they had the girls on roller skates to come out with the food. And we're going to have to do that again now because we have the separation. People are going to drive-in movies so that they can see theatrics, they'll see films, and they also are going to go to drive-in movies to see these performances. So maybe we ought to open a drive-in theater with Sidney Myer. Don't tell Mama drive-in. And we could sit there and watch the cabaret stars. And I know a couple of them who love you blatantly. And I could tell you, I don't want to tell you anything behind your back, but you're well loved by every artist I've ever met who knows you and everything you've ever written. I mean, you're very very well respected.
Well, Joey, I'm going to return that compliment by saying that you have one of those names that whenever that name is mentioned, people just react like, immediately some wonderful memory comes to mind at the mention of the name Joey Reynolds. And I count me in on that because I have had so much fun that is directly points back to you.
Oh, thanks, James. Thank you. And don't you call him Jim. It's James Gavin.
My friends call me Jim, but my name James. I decided early on that James Gavin should be my author's name because it sounded very serious. But my family and my buddies call me Jim.
And you're going to do the book now that we're looking for. The next writing is about
George Michael.
Yeah. And did we leave anything out in between here?
About things I've done?
No, I mean we'd be here for 2 nights. But a couple of the highlights, a couple of the artists that you've done. Let's just pepper it a little.
People that I've written about.
Yeah.
For years, I wrote profiles for the arts and leisure section of the New York Times. I still, on occasion, write for the Times, but I had a wonderful period in the 90s and 2000s where I was able to do profiles of people that I wasn't writing books about. And one of the people that I did was Nina Simone. That was harrowing. That was possibly the most unpleasant 20 minutes I have ever spent interviewing anybody.
I must share with you, I mentioned the Royal Arms. She
Yes.
closed her piano on my hand at the Royal Arms. And I know her daughter, Simone, who is also a very good singer. I like her.
She is. Yes.
And I told her the story. I said, your mother, I was in a civil rights, she was strong with civil rights. And I was always a liberal. I mean, whatever you want to call that, a liberal. I mean, I believe that everybody should have whatever they want,
Yes.
just so long as they earned it. I mean, I don't think you should just take it. And so she was, I made some comment. She was on my TV show, and she closed the piano on my hand.
What?
Oh, yeah. So don't give me your crap about how she mistreated you for 20 minutes.
You know who else I got to do? I got to do Annie Lennox, and I got to do Miriam Makeba, and I got to do Eileen Farrell, and all these jazz singers and cabaret artists that I loved. I got to profile so many of them in the New York Times in those years, and a New York Times profile made a difference.
Oh, yeah.
It sold records, it sold tickets, and it spread reputations. And sometimes Johnny Mathis, I did him too. Sometimes those articles, as you know, would be syndicated. So they would show up in other newspapers. And so my New York Times freelancing has been extremely important in my life. It helped get me, I'm sure, the Chet Baker book deal, because I'd had a slew of those articles under my belt as of the time that book was sold based on a 4-page proposal to Knopf. And they bought it, and they changed my life forever.
Well, James Gavin, we got to look him up. You got a site?
JamesGavin.com.
That's complicated.
I often
an easier one. So JamesGavin.com, and you can see all about him, or Wikipedia and everybody else that writes about everybody.
Yes, and friend me on Facebook, because I'm probably the first James Gavin who will come up. And I use Facebook as my diary, and it's also a place where I enjoy paying tribute to a lot of people I admire. And I place you very close to the top of that list in the upper echelons, because you have you're just somebody that I associate with fun and smart thinking. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, Jim. That's a nice compliment. I'll call you Jim.
Please call me.
So James Gavin, look out for him on 46th Street, where I'll be there with my hooker.
Thank you so much for asking me to do this. This has been delightful, and it has flown by.
I love you, James. You're great.
Back,
You're
Joey.
great.
Let's do this again sometime.
Anytime you want to stop by here, and I'll show you my collection of books.
In Florida, you mean?
Of book.
Oh.
Let a smile be your umbrella, but don't get a mouthful of rain.